Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background while reading this work. This is Passerine, Chapter 7, Part 4. Same trigger warnings apply, in the description as well. Wilbur was being unmade. That was what it was, as he fell through the black spiraling between what was real and what was imagined, drifting in the space between lie and the truth. He felt himself being pulled apart and then pulled back together, born and then unborn, and then born and then reborn and then unmade. Father had called it the crash, but that wasn't quite true. It was crashing and flying and crashing again, the euphoria of flight equaled by the pain of the collapse. It was agony. It was dawn. It was over. He hit the ground. Breathed in, breathed out. The air tasted bitter, like ash, like the dust of a guitar case sitting unopened for years. His ears were ringing, his vision blurred. There was nothing beyond the feel of the cold snow under him, coarse and biting. His muddled mind could grasp no thought other than, I need a blanket. He spat snow and blood out of his mouth and struggled upright, managing to get on his knees before he fell back again. What fight there was left in his body fleeing as his vision finally cleared, and he realized he was watching the end of the world. The sky was red, the city was burning. Fissures arched across the ground like lightning, chasms leading straight to the underworld. As Wilbur looked on, the earth shook again, and more cracks spread, one breaking open just feet away from him. As Wilbur looked on, the earth shook again, more cracks spread, one breaking open just feet away from him. Shirt, Wilbur thought, scrambling back, his heart in his throat. Shirt, shirt, shirt. The only structure that remained relatively intact was the church. And standing at its bell tower, at the eye of the storm, was none other than Dream. He didn't seem to notice Wilbur's reappearance. How could he? In the same way that giants paid no heed to ants, the god had bigger affairs to tend to than a single mortal standing in the wreckage of the only universe he had ever known. Dream paced around the circumference of the bell, trailing a hand on its bronze surface, only pausing whenever another earthquake hit. It took Wilbur a few dizzy beats to realize he was causing it. With a tilt of his head and a flick of his fingers, the green god was slowly breaking the world apart, remaking it into another version, another stage. Wilbur barely registered the thud of another person falling behind him. What the? Wilbur turned to watch as Techno blinked groggily at the scene before them, waking from a dream and straight into a nightmare. He already looked so exhausted, pink hair tied loosely back from his face that had seen better days. He was so pale, the only color on his face, the dark lines under his eyes. How long had they been fighting? It felt like years. It was only hours. What's going on? Techno croaked. The apocalypse, Wilbur returned. Techno groaned as he fell back against the ground, burying his face in his arms. 5 minutes, he said. Let me have 5 God's-darned minutes without having to deal with this. We don't have that much time, Father said. Wilbur raised his head to see his father touching down on the ground beside them. Soundless as the night, his eyes scanned the broken city around him before settling on Techno and Wilbur's discarded weapons, and, because Wilbur could never catch a freaking break, they were sitting leagues away on a slice of earth separated by a dozen crisscross lines of fissures. When do we ever have enough time? Techno's voice was muffled by the snow. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Wilbur groaned in sympathy, even as he accepted Father's offered hand and got to his feet. He reached down and grabbed the back of Techno's tunic, hauling him up so that Techno leaned on him while he leaned on his father. The three of them, exhausted in all sense of the word, watched as Dream continued breaking and shattering everything that no longer fit whatever story he wanted to tell next. I'll get your weapons, Father said, and Wilbur expected him to fly away to retrieve them, but instead he simply snapped his fingers, and Wilbur's sword and bow and Techno's trident and chain whip clattered at their feet. Wilbur glanced with shock at his father. When did you learn that nifty little trick? Must have picked it up somewhere, Father muttered as Techno wordlessly rearmed himself. Wilbur bent to retrieve his bow and rapier, surprised to find that his quiver was filled once more with new arrows, with gleaming obsidian feathers as fletching. These gods, Wilbur thought, I'll never understand their silly games. This is it then, Techno said as he spun his trident idly between his fingers. This ends here. Everything ends here. How do we do this? Wilbur asked. The last time we think we got him cornered, he just shoved us into some other realm and went on with his merry way. I won't give him the chance this time, Father said sternly. Sweat was beading on Techno's forehead despite the cold, but his words were steady when he said, "We'll be your support, Phil. Now go." "Not yet," Father said, turning to Wilbur. He lifted his cloak and reached into the inner pocket. Pulling out a silver necklace, he pressed it into Wilbur's palm and leaned in to whisper into Wilbur's ear. "Find what is sacred to you and never let go. If you would take any advice from your old man, let it be that." "Why does it feel like you're saying goodbye?" Wilbur whispered back, curling his fingers around the necklace. Father stepped back with a small, sad smile. "I'm not," he said. "It's just in case." "Just in case?" Wilbur demanded. "In case of what?" Another one-shouldered shrug. "Worst case scenario." Wilbur placed the necklace into his pocket. "Sure," he said. "Let's lie to ourselves. It should be easy. We've been doing it for years, haven't we?" Father blinked and looked as if he was about to say something else. But then the earth trembled again. A harsh laugh cut through the cold air. The three of them turned to see that the green god had finally caught sight of them. He stood at the edge of the bell tower, balancing on the bowels of his feet as if the dizzying height was of no consequence to him. Even from far below, Wilbur could see the jagged line of his smile carved into his face. "Hello," he called out. Didn't expect you back so soon, I admit." He spread his arms to take in the chaos all around them. "But I guess destruction is more fun when there are witnesses." Wilbur closed his hand around the hilt of his rapier. Despite the ache in his soul, he was ready. With Techno on one side and his father on the other, there was little else he needed. The northern winds whistled past them, and if Wilbur listened carefully, he could almost hear the song they were trying to sing. There were no words left to be said. They had done this 1,000 times before. They took off, Phil to the skies and Techno and Wilbur rushing across the ruined ground. Phil would get to the tower first, but the other two would not be far behind. They leapt over chasm after chasm, skidding on snow and falling to their knees, but still moving forwards, heading towards the church. Every jump rattled Techno's bones and made him want to cry out, but he pushed it all down. The world was being torn apart by an all-powerful, bored little shirt. Techno had no right to complain about something as inconsequential as a potentially sprained ankle. And then suddenly, it wasn't inconsequential. It was an easy jump. He could have made it, he should have made it, but instead he came up short, an inch shy of safety. Technoblade fell quietly. There was a sharp tug, and his shoulder almost popped out of its socket as his pulse was abruptly halted. He looked up, legs dangling in open air, and he found Wilbur leaning over the edge with his hands across Techno's wrist, his only lifeline. "Gods," Wilbur cursed, struggling with Techno's weight. "Pull yourself up, Techno." Techno's boots scrambled for purchase against the chasm's face. He could feel Wilbur's hands slipping, but Techno knew Wilbur would more readily let both of them fall than let go. This was how Techno knew he already found family again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his left foot found a steady spot to carry most of his weight. With some awkward maneuvering, Techno managed to haul himself over the edge, breathing heavily with his hands on his knees, but on solid ground once more. "What the hell?" Techno demanded. "You and your grand speeches about never losing me again, but did you ever stop and ask if I could afford to lose you? Get a freaking grip." Techno pushed hair out of his eyes and blinked slowly at the furious king. "Okay," Techno said quietly. "I'm sorry." "Are you all right then?" Wilbur asked, anger quickly evaporating into concern. "We have to help Father." "I don't think he needs our help," Techno thought, squinting up at the bell tower. From this angle he couldn't see much, but he could hear it all, the chasm of steel on steel and the distant thud of two gods being absolutely trying their best to kill each other. "I'm all right," assured Techno. And even if Wilbur didn't seem to believe him, they had no other choice but to soldier on. They were off again, leaping from one broken chunk of earth to another, a bit more cautiously, constantly looking over their shoulders to make sure the other had made it safely. When they finally made it to the foot of the bell tower, the pain in Techno's ankle had reached a boiling point, and only intensified when Wilbur pushed the tower door open, and they were met with the staircase spiraling into the sky. "I hate this," Techno declared. "I hate every aspect of this, and I would like to quit and be a humble farmer far from here." Wilbur stared at him, giving him 2 seconds to follow through on his words. "Are you done?" Wilbur said. "Because in case you haven't noticed, the end of all things is currently being orchestrated right above our heads." "I regret ever meeting you," Wilbur snorted as he started up the stairs. "You say that as if it isn't your dry humor that rubbed off on me." They took the steps 2 at a time, round and around until Techno couldn't remember life before the climb. It wasn't until they were halfway there when Techno's knees finally gave up and he slumped against the brick wall, panting and biting back a scream of frustration. He was holding them back. It was the most important battle of his darned life, and he was holding them back. Wilbur, standing a few steps up from Techno, looked back with furrowed brows. "What's wrong?" he asked. You look pale. This isn't like you." He took in the sweat dripping down Techno's face, the exhaustion evident in his trembling shoulders and liquid limbs. "Techno?" "You're right," Techno murmured, too tired to care about what he was saying. "I'm not myself. I'm not even a fraction of what I used to be. I hate this fragile body and all its whining and all its petty demands." He looked up, met Wilbur's eyes, willing him to understand, because there was no way in hell he could ever speak the words himself. He didn't have the vocabulary for it. "I hate being this weak, Wilbur." Wilbur's mouth fell open in a silent "oh" as realization finally hit him. Before, all this would have been effortless. The leaping, the running, the climbing, something as small as a sprained ankle or a healing stab wound would have made no hindrance at all, just little details to shake off like bothersome bugs. But that was before. This was now. "Techno," Wilbur whispered. "You're mortal?" It had been written in ancient scripts, in a book that looked exactly like all others in the forgotten library, a heavy bound and dust-covered. Philza had flipped gingerly through it, afraid that one wrong move would turn the fragile paper into ash, and had found the words on the last pages. "You seek power, reader," it had said, "but all things come with a price, power for power, divinity for divinity. If you wish to be a god among gods, one must be the vessel, the other the sacrifice." Philza had promised it would be their last resort, only until push came to shove, Techno had said. And the green god had definitely shoved. And so Philza had pulled Techno back, and the two of them had talked, one god to another, for the last time. They had both known it was time, just as they had known, that first day on the battlefield of ice and snow, arrows flying overhead and both of them lit from within by divine fire, that their roads had crossed, and that there was no going back. Technoblade, blood god, and emperor had offered his sacred hand, his scarred hand to Philza, angel of death and god of freedom, and they had clasped each other's fingers like old friends did after a long separation. For a moment there was only the two of them in that forest of dreams, and then Philza whispered the ancient words. It almost sounded like a solemn prayer, a prayer to the god Techno used to be, and to the god Philza was becoming. Towards the end, Techno's hand had betrayed his pain. It shook, just a bit, as his veins burned gold, turning him into a gilded patchwork, half mortal, half god, his very soul caught in the crossfire between morality and divinity. His breath came quick and labored, and still Philza murmured, slipping silent apologies between the primordial spell. When the final word was said, Techno had fallen to his knees before Philza, a wicked reversal of fortunes, but he did not let go. Technoblade forsook his godhood without protest. There was barely a struggle, barely a scream of agony. It had been his sacrifice to make, and he would be darned if he'd let himself regret it. He had wrestled with martyrdom and won. When Techno stood again, he was human, simple and breakable, with numbered years and numb hands. Inside him, there was a hollow pit where his godhood used to rest. He was going to make a landfill out of it, and Philza was awake. Now he stood in a bell tower overlooking a ruined city, fires raging until the horizon, burning away homes and streets that once teemed with easy life. Families and friends gathered in bunches like sweet-smelling bouquets, but like flowers unaware of the gardener's plucking hands, they had existed in the shadow of being too large to comprehend. Their lives already decided for them, all their tragedies and loves, their hopes and their secrets, laid into predetermined places on the green god's mosaic. But that would end today, because Philza was his antithesis, and he was going to set everybody free. The bell tolled as he and Dream continued their deadly dance around the tower, swords meeting and then unmeeting. Dream must have sensed the change. He must have seen it in the way Philza moved, taking each step with utmost confidence that the ground would meet him and not the other way around. He must have felt it in the renewed strength behind Philza's blows. He must have known Philza was still holding back. For the first time since their encounter, the green god had the wits to finally be unnerved. One mistake was all it took, a misstep in their eons-old waltz. The green god swung too early, his sword cutting through air as Philza simply ducked out of the way. The bell shuddered as Dream's blade bit into the bronze and struck there. As Dream tried to pull it free, Philza kicked at his knees and sent him spinning against one of the pillars holding up the tower's roof, unarmed. Dream stumbled against the pillar, nearly toppling over the edge of the tower, and before he could regain his balance, Philza swung at him. Dream managed to duck just in time, but Philza's sword cut through the pillar behind him as easily as a hot knife through butter. The pillar buckled and fell apart, and the roof on the tower began leaning, almost halfway to carving in on itself. The green god whistled as he jumped back from Philza's advance. "Listen, Philza." "I'm done listening to you." Philza swung again, this time managing to nick Dream's forearm. Brilliant red blood ran from the cut. It did not heal. Dream looked down at his wounded arm, his brows furrowed with confusion. "Why did that hurt?" he asked, no one in particular. He raised his eyes to Phil, and his confusion turned to fury. "What have you done?" "The very thing you tried to keep me from doing," said Philza, raising his sword above his head. "Now hold still, Dream. Let me take everything away from you as you took everything from me." The green god made to raise his hand, perhaps to conjure himself a new sword or attempt to throw Philza into another dream. Philza's hand shot out, gripping Dream's wrist and twisting. He leaned in to watch the other god's discomfort turn to pain, turn to panic, as he struggled to free himself from Philza's crushing hold. "Little spider," Philza whispered, "caught in your own web." "You think this phases me?" Dream demanded, still trying to pull his wrist away. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" The angel of death looked at the green god with the eyes of a son taken too soon. "Yes," he said, "I think you are." Dream snarled, an animal cornered. "You forget you've tried this before. You always failed. Always." "Ah, but that was before I came to realize what you were." Philza made sure Dream could see every inch of his expression, every depleted line, every mark the long years had etched into his skin. "You would have us think that you're doing all of this, the rewrites, the infinite loops, just for the fun of it. But you don't really have the luxury of indulging yourself, do you? Because you're afraid. Every second of every day of every life, you are afraid. You have known me since you were made. You have known since your first breath that I was the only creature capable of breaking you. And before I could even try, before you gave me any reason to, you ran. You pretended it was all some silly little game to keep your heart from exploding out of your chest with fear. And you ran. You sculpted worlds, rewrote histories, just to keep me from seeing you squirm, because you're a coward. That's what you are, Dream. You're a goodness-darned coward." "Take that back," the green god whispered. "Take that back right now." "Make me," challenged Philza. "Oh, wait, you can't." They were equal forces, once upon a time, the spider and the songbird. Control and freedom, the two oldest powers in the universe, the first of the gods, maintaining a delicate balance until one tipped the scale. Philza was merely tipping it back. "You bought yourself some time," said Philza. "Eons of it, but the clock is ticking, and there's nowhere else to run. The game is over." Dream was breathing heavily, his emerald eyes wide. "You can hurt me," he said, "but you can't kill me. You can't. That's not how we do this. We'll always be hunting each other. You have the upper hand now, but not forever." "You're right." Philza loosened his hold on Dream, allowing him to step away. The green god gave him a look of mistrustful confusion as he rubbed his wrist where Philza had left scorch marks. "I can't kill you. If I did, you'll simply be reborn, and the chase will continue. I know that now, and I also know what I have to do." He glanced over Dream's shoulders, and the other god turned on his heel to follow Philza's line of sight. When he finally saw what Philza meant, he whirled around with an incredulous, almost fearful expression. "You can't be serious," Dream said, voice trembling. You can't be." Then regaining a bit of confidence, he said, "No, you really can't be, because I just break out. I can carve my way out, little by little." "Not if you had someone watching you," Philza said simply. What little hope the green god had died in his eyes. "You're an idiot," he declared, with equal parts disbelief and alarm. He moved towards Philza, grabbing a fistful of his tunic and shaking him. It would be the closest to begging he would stoop to. "Do you have any idea what I would lose? What you would lose?" "All things come with a price," Philza said, surprised by the sudden burn of tears in his eyes. "And I pay it, so they don't have to. I'm done running away from my problems. I'm done begging the stars for answers. I've brought the stars low, Dream, and they will do my bidding for me." "Why does it feel like you're saying goodbye?" Wilbur had asked. Because he was. He'd said his farewells, even if he was the only one who truly knew it. He'd pressed one last gift into his son's hands, but his eyes had been on Techno as he'd spoken of never letting go, so Techno might understand. In hindsight, 10 days or 10 years from now, that feels it was leaving Wilbur to him, and him to Wilbur. Behind the green god, far below in the middle of the broken earth, was a cut in the universe, a jagged gate to a place of unmaking. It stood waiting for a green-eyed god and his keeper, a prison of infinite void for the two loneliest gods on earth. Philza grabbed Dream's wrist once more. Manacles of flesh and blood. It's been you and me since the beginning, Dream, Philza said solemnly, and it'll be me and you in the end. Father? Philza froze. What are you doing?